I'm Joshua Cohen. I'm the community director at Partners for Climate Action Hudson Valley, where we support ecological leadership across the Hudson Valley by deploying capital in its many forms to support local equitable solutions. I presume most of you are on our mailing list, which is how you found your way here. But if not, please sign up at climateactionhv.org. We also host the Hudson Valley Climate Action Network, or HVCAN. If you're interested in joining that network, you can visit hvcan.org as well. So today's session will be focused on how to build a successful carbon neutral business with CEO Nels Leader of Bread Alone Bakery. Now, these sessions are part of a series intended as learning opportunities to build community and share knowledge. I'd like to thank the Hudson Valley Economic Development Corporation for co-sponsoring this session with us today. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Matt Stitchcomb, who's going to moderate our conversation with Nels. But first, I'd like to mention that we will have a moderated Q&A section followed by an audience Q&A. So I'd encourage you to try to hold your questions for the audience Q&A portion, at which point you can put your questions directly into the chat. You can also wait until that point to raise your virtual hand if you want to ask your question directly. So, and I'm going to ask that folks, when not speaking, try to keep themselves on mute, just to cut down on background sound. So I will now hand it over to you, Matt.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming this morning, and you will almost definitely hear my children in the background. So I'll try to keep on mute when I'm not speaking. Nels, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to dig into this and learn more about what it means to be a carbon neutral business and your work at Bread Alone. Maybe you could start. Oh, sorry. For everybody who doesn't know, Nels Leader is the CEO of Bread Alone, and he's going to tell you a bit about the story of Bread Alone, and we're going to go into a conversation around some of the innovative things that they're doing with this family-owned business. So Nels, let me hand it off to you. Maybe you can tell us a bit about the history of Bread Alone and your work and your role there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Climate Action team. For everyone here, if your morning was like mine, I know everything takes a little bit longer when it snows, getting the dog out, getting the kids up, getting your car out. So I really appreciate everyone being here nice and early. I'm going to endeavor to cover about 40 years of Bread Alone history from 40 years ago to today in about 5 minutes, using about a dozen slides. So bear with me as we plow through that. And then Matt and I will dive into conversation more specifically on Bread Alone's work in sustainability. All right, can I get a thumbs up that my screen share is working? Awesome.
Looks good.
Okay, so I'm going to start at the beginning. This is the first known picture of Bread Alone Bakery from 1983. The story is that my father, that gentleman in the center of the picture, was a chef working in New York City. And like so many people today, wanted to escape the city and do something rooted in community, rooted in a more simple lifestyle. And you have to put yourself back into this 1983 timeframe. This was the land of Wonder Bread. You could not go to your grocery store and buy a loaf of crusty ciabatta or baguette. And Dan had this vision of bringing that style of bread to his community. This is a picture of the front of the original bakery out in Boyceville, New York. Not much of a business plan at the time. All the product was sold out of that front shop window. And one of the innovative things that Bread Alone did in those very early days was commit to using organic grains at a time when the organic movement was just getting going. So Bread Alone's commitment to the natural world really begins with those first loaves of bread that used organic grain. A few years into the business, the original oven that they built started to crumble. They were figuring things out as they went along, so they built a new wood-fired brick oven. One of the things that I love about this picture is that you can see they constructed the oven outside. You can see here they're out in nature, and then after the oven was built, they put up the building around it. A fun historical fact that some on this call will appreciate, that man pictured there is Skip Backus, longtime executive director of the Omega Institute. He was the general contractor that built the original Bread Alone. I'm going to fast forward now from about 1990 to 2010. This is a picture of the bakery in 2010. And at that point, we had really maximized what we could do out of that footprint. The story goes that we would roll bread onto one truck to cool, roll it off to package, and then roll it onto our other truck to ship. And this is about the time that I joined the business and worked with the family to envision a larger version of Bread Alone for the future. And so we set about designing an expansion for the business to our current primary home, just north of Kingston and Lake Katrine. This is the design for the bakery. Of course, there's no one way to build a bakery. This was done by the family. The picture of the inside of the bakery before we went into construction, and a shot while we were under construction, installing the new oven system that would support the business into the future. And now we're starting to get to today. Here is our main location, our certified organic production bakery, powered in part by 200 kilowatts of solar on our roof. And then last year, Bread Alone renovated our original Boyceville facility, turning it into a carbon neutral bakery that we fully electrified, and then put enough solar on site to meet the full needs of the building throughout the course of the year. So we electrified all of our appliances in the building, and then through that 400 kilowatts of on-site solar, we're able to create a net zero carbon neutral facility. Bread Alone today operates with a core purpose to serve honest food, create prosperity for our people, and minimize further harm to the planet. And we honor that purpose by ensuring that all of our decisions feed through 4 values: feeding people, preserving the planet, creating equity, and ensuring our longevity. And we stay true to that work by setting a number of specific 1, 3, and 10-year goals for each value to ensure that we're on track in serving our values as we grow the business. Okay, Bread Alone uses a few certifications to convey our values to the world. I think most folks on the call are probably familiar with USDA Organic and 1% for the Planet. So I want to talk for a moment about climate neutral. This is the certification that we leverage to communicate to the world and verify that we are a carbon neutral business. And the principle of climate neutral is that you reduce your emissions every year and then offset the rest now and forever. I'm really proud that Bread Alone, we were an inaugural member of the certification. So the first year that it was created, Bread Alone was one of the brands that made the commitment. In the time since, many larger brands have come on board, including some big names like REI, Allbirds, and Clean Canteen. And so each year, Bread Alone is required to measure our carbon footprint, make commitments to reduction actions for the year ahead, and then purchase credits to offset any emissions from the prior year. Matt and I, over the past year, have been talking about how businesses like Bread Alone can connect the dots between these carbon offset efforts and regional programs. And one of the offset programs that Bread Alone is considering for calendar year 2022 is a landfill gas to energy project just 60 miles north of Bread Alone in Fulton County. That's right outside of Albany. And Matt, when we get into the Q&A, I know we'll spend a few more minutes digging into this specific work and how we can leverage that work to tell a compelling story of the community. Some of the results of our values-driven work, Bread Alone continues to grow and hopefully setting an example that you can embrace these values while maintaining sustainability as a business, as an ongoing concern. What's next for us? We learned a lot in our project in Boyceville about how to scale a renewable facility. And now we're thinking about how we can build an additional facility in the future that will give the business many more decades of growth, scaling sustainable construction methods, leveraging more electrification of our facility, and also pursuing employee ownership for the business. All right, that was 40 years in a few minutes. And now, Matt, let's dig into some of the details.
Great. Thank you so much. That's really inspiring and really exciting to hear about some of the future plans, including employee ownership. And there's a lot I want to dig into all of these things. But let's start just by talking a little bit about, I'd be very curious to know the process of going carbon neutral or climate neutral. How did you develop the baseline? What's included in the baseline? I'm just curious about the actual mechanics of that for any other business owners that might be on the call.
It's a complicated question, right? How do you go about that process of establishing your baseline? The tools to do that are not publicly available. There's no county or state resource that helps you in that effort. And the reason that Bread Alone made the commitment to certify climate neutral a few years ago is that that specific organization had invested a great deal of time and effort into developing a scalable tool to help brands measure their carbon footprint. So that tool is called their B, and it measures scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. They have a few different levels of application for the tool to make it more accessible for small brands and then much more intensive for a larger brand like Bread Alone. So what they, I know, advertise on the website is that for smaller businesses of less than roughly 1 million in revenue, it's a process that can be done through submission of information through web form. For larger businesses, it's a multi-month process of very detailed submission of information about your footprint. And then that tool, through scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, results in your carbon footprint.
Would you mind telling people what's included in each scope?
Sure. So scope 1, and Matt, you mean just defining scope 1?
Oh,
2,
yeah.
and 3?
I mean, just like what it means both generally, like what's the scope, what's in scope 1 emissions, scope 2, scope 3, and if there are things specifically for Bread Alone in each of those scopes that might be unique to you all.
Sure. So scope 1 emissions are the emissions produced on site. So for example, Bread Alone uses natural gas for the burners that bake our bread. The carbon emissions from that natural gas combustion is a scope 1 emission. Scope 2 is the power generation for energy that we use that takes place off-site. So we are grid connected both at our production bakery in Kingston and at our carbon neutral bakery in Boyceville. And so the power that we do not generate from our solar comes from the grid that's produced at a plant, and there is an emission connected to that power generation. That is a scope 2 emission. Scope 3 is the entirety of our supply chain. So when we purchase flour from our mill that goes into our bread, there's emission associated with the activity of that mill, and that is a scope 3 emission. To your question, Matt, of some of the big levers that are relevant for Bread Alone, scope 1, we still burn a lot of fossil fuel in the business. As I mentioned, at our certified organic production bakery, our oven system uses natural gas. Another big scope 1 emission for Bread Alone is our vehicle miles over the road. We still run diesel vehicles, even as we pursue electrification of our fleet. And for us, scope 3 is driven primarily by our ingredient suppliers, which is about 30% of our cost base. It's money spent with our suppliers.
Thank you. That's super helpful. Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, you've mentioned a few things, like ultimately electrification of the fleet. Your new facility is baking with electricity, which is really exciting, and also probably not without challenges in terms of learning how to, make the same breads consistently or the same pastries consistently with different heat sources. I'm curious if you could speak a little to what that learning curve has looked like, what that transition has meant for staff, for the organization, and also, and I want to get into a lot of the decarbonization and solar that you've done, but I'm curious about, like what else you have planned in terms of reducing your footprint, right? Not just covering it with more solar or whatever it may be. Are there other efficiencies like sourcing from more local sources or anything else that you're thinking about that could help you actually continue to reduce your footprint?
Yep. So first, to the first question around the challenges of the project in Boyceville, we had to conquer really specific technical challenges to achieve that electrification. Like what we need to do is pretty straightforward, right? We need to electrify much of our lifestyles and then produce from renewable sources the electricity that's required. And so we took that really simple principle and then had to apply it to a complicated manufacturing environment. And the big unlock for us with that project, some of the things are easy now. Air source heat pumps, even in a kitchen setting, moving to induction burners. These things are tried and true, and you really just have to collect those different technologies into one place. For the baking system, we collaborated with a equipment partner based out of Germany, and they built for the first time a heat exchanger that was sized to support our operation, a larger baking operation. So that's a big risk, right? To solve that technical challenge for the first time and trust you're going to get it right and apply it. And then we did some unique integrations. The one that I'm most proud of is that for commercial baking, you need to produce a lot of steam for your ovens. One of the reasons that bakeries like Bread Alone produce bread with that beautiful golden crust is that we have steam injection in our ovens. And we were able to integrate a steam generation system with that electric heat exchanger. And that was a totally novel solution that we put in place. So there are technical challenges that we had to conquer for that project, Matt, to achieve that really simple principle. For your second question around reduction, that is at the core of the climate neutral certification. First, you have to target your reduction activity before you pursue your offsets. So for Bread Alone, in our retail footprint, customers may notice that our menu is increasingly vegetarian and vegan as one way that we are reducing carbon footprint in our retail stores. For the wholesale bakery, we source the vast majority of our ingredients, which is our flour, within 4 hours of Bread Alone. Our mills are outside of Montreal and in New York State. And we each year now are measuring the energy intensity of our bread. So we look at our total energy usage, how much bread we produce, and we're trying to consistently reduce the energy intensity of the business. That's the variable that we're actually measuring.
Is there a certain bread I should avoid? Or like if I'm gonna not eat one?
Probably, I'm sure
probably all of them given my waist, but
our fruit and nut sourdough, you cannot get walnuts from New York. Black walnuts, unfortunately, are not too tasty.
That is a really good bread though. So all right, I'll have to figure that one out. So I'd love to talk. Think that's super interesting, and thank you, and really exciting what you all are doing. I know that there's when we've talked in the past before around the state and federal programs that you've tapped into to be able to solarize your buildings or do other energy efficiency upgrades. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about that with an eye towards other business owners who might be on the call who could potentially benefit from the same programs.
Definitely. Yeah, I know, Matt, one of the goals for today is to make sure that folks listening can take away some really specific practical pieces of advice. And there is significant funding available out there in the world from New York and federal sources to support some of the types of projects that Bread Alone has done. And I was trying to think of a good analogy for our experience with the process, and I came up with it's sort of like climbing a Catskill peak. It's like it is arduous. There are moments when it's painful climbing that peak, but you get a great view at the top, and it's totally worth it. So the process of pursuing the type of grant funding that Bread Alone has received is painstaking. There's a really high administrative burden to breaking through, but then you get a big check that really makes a difference for your business and supports the types of projects that we're all passionate about. So specific programs that Bread Alone has used. The USDA has a program called the Rural Energy for America program. The acronym is REAP. And through that program, Bread Alone was able to secure a 6-digit grant, not reduced cost funding, but a grant to lower the cost of our solar project in Boyceville. It was an 18-month process to get that over the finish line from our first outreach to the USDA to when we actually got the funding, but it ended up being about 20% of the cost of that solar array and took the payback period from 8 to 9 years to 5 to 7 years. So really meaningful contribution to the project. So that's the USDA Rural Energy for America program. For the Boyceville project, we also took advantage of a county level program called CPACE. PACE, it's Property Assessed Clean Energy, that's the acronym. And this is a program that provides financing for energy improvement projects in a commercial setting. So for example, if you want to upgrade from a propane or natural gas heating system to an air source heat pump, and you could demonstrate energy savings from that project, you can get 100% low interest financing from PACE. And for any business owners on the call, a unique advantage of PACE financing is that it ends up being off balance sheet. I know we're getting into the weeds a little bit, but you pay it back through a tax assessment. So if you're concerned about the amount of debt that you carry on your business, this is off balance sheet and is paid back through a tax assessment.
That's great. And these programs have really allowed you to do what you've been able to do, both with the 2 facilities that have on-site solar. And I'm thinking about, say, in the Rhinebeck Cafe, where you don't own the building, right? I believe you lease that space.
Correct.
Are you able to implement any sustainability initiatives in those places? And I know you're doing work around food waste too, so I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, so leasing is a complicating factor to pursuing some of these programs. I know that CPACE is, you can pursue it even with a lease, but again, there are complicating factors that I won't go into now, but I actually just spoke to my CPACE rep yesterday and went through the details of how that works. It is possible. For Bread Alone's retail footprints, we're focused on electrifying our kitchens. So like almost every commercial kitchen across Ulster County, across the country, we burn either propane or natural gas to cook your food. And we are converting those kitchens to induction cooking. So regardless of whether or not you own a building, that's something that you can do. And that's the focus of our retail efforts.
And could you speak a little bit about waste? How are you handling waste in your facilities, both in the commercial, like production facilities, as well as in the retail locations?
Yep. Bread Alone has company-wide composting. The most significant source is our production bakery outside of Kingston. And what we try to do with our waste stream is first donate any leftover food to people in need, then animals in need, and then finally compost. I think an interesting talking point on compost is highlighting this moment we're in where industry broadly is trying to create more compostable products, for example, compostable utensils or compostable bags, and the infrastructure to handle those new compostable items is still under development. So as an example, Bread Alone has pursued the creation of a compostable bread bag. I'm sure some of you buy our sliced bread out in the stores. Currently, we use a single-use LPDE plastic bag. That is a bad product in the world, and we want to change that. So we've identified a compostable film that we can use to replace that single-use plastic, but most composting facilities won't yet accept that product. So we're in this moment where the standards in the industry need to catch up and get set so that we can compost more goods.
Great. I'd love to switch gears a little bit and talk about the why. We've spoken a bit about how you've done a lot of these things. I'm curious about, how you approach this in the family. Was there any internal resistance? Were there hearts and minds of key stakeholders that you had to convince to really put this big focus on developing a sustainable enterprise? I'm curious about the inner dynamics. What was that journey like? And how has it been for your business? I mean, I saw the graphs where everything seems to be going in the right direction, but I'm curious about what that journey's been like.
Yeah. The way we talk about that evolution within the business is that we are running a natural experiment. The thesis, the hypothesis is that this commitment to doing work that is meaningful for the world will, one, provide us intrinsic rewards at the business, not just the family, and that isn't even the priority. The intrinsic rewards of the full team that through their actions every day feel they are contributing to a cause a little bit greater than themselves. We feel fully at the business that finding rewards from your work requires that you do contribute to some cause greater than oneself, and that you do it with a group of people. That is what creates satisfaction, fundamental satisfaction in the human experience. So that is part of the hypothesis. We also believe that this work will attract people to support the business, and that it will allow us to achieve longevity. We firmly believe that these actions to be meaningful need to endure over time, and that means the business has to be successful according to standard metrics over time. So the thesis is that we will enjoy the work, that people will respond to it, and that we can keep the flywheel accelerating over time. And so far, the natural experiment, now over 40 years in many ways, starting with the use of organic grain in 1983 and committing much more deeply to people and planet today, continues to work. So we're going to keep pushing until the natural experiment needs to be changed.
That's great. I'm wondering, what have some of the roadblocks been? Have there been, accountants and other people pushing back and saying, hey, you're spending way too much money on solar or whatever it may be? I'm just curious what kind of resistance you faced along the way.
Yeah, I'll speak about some of my personal evolution. I think I've learned some really important and hard lessons along the way. I came to the business 10 years ago with like fire in my belly over issues of climate. It was something I was already really passionate about. And so I saw the opportunity to really dial up how we were responding to that issue within Bread Alone. And I sort of went full throttle, pushing out that work and message. And I did not have an appreciation for the need and importance of bringing the full team along with that work and message. And so a challenge for us has been learning to, we're a team of 240 people. So building a team of individuals that share in this purpose and that agree with the priorities. It's like if an employee sees that we are investing in a big solar project, they need to really understand how that creates a brighter future for everyone and isn't Nels's pet solar project. So that challenge of really creating an organization that is aligned in this work has been a years-long effort that I am proud now to say I think we've really made incredible headway on.
That's so here comes the little dog. That so resonates with me. I, as you know, used to lead the sustainability work at Etsy and had the exact same experience. When I first got into that, I went out to calculate the baseline. We figured out emissions from every item in the marketplace. We're all gung-ho, put out these big goals, but didn't take the time to really make it relevant to everybody and really, make it be something that people understand why you're doing it for the business and how it positively affects them. So I think that's such an important point. I just wanted to reiterate it, that, bringing people along for the ride is going to ultimately lead to success, I think, in terms of these sustainability initiatives. And what about other family members? Were they all on board with this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm incredibly fortunate that my parents led a lifestyle of purpose from the early days, and so that's always been an influence on my life. And I think the work that we've done as a family is continuing to find comfort in evolving what that story means and pushing it into the future. Just being an organic producer is not the same thing today that it was 30 years ago, when that was the leading edge of work in sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
And Matt, I want to pick up on the comment about people for a moment to highlight that experience for me was really the impetus for investing much more deeply in appreciating how Bread Alone can become a people-driven and people-focused enterprise, and is really the seed of what has led to our commitment to becoming employee-owned in the future. And we've spoken mostly about Bread Alone's commitment to planet, but the commitment to people is just as strong. And the project that we are most excited about internally at the company today is creating a future of employee ownership and using that as a lever to help create better equity in the community and for our employees.
That's exactly where I wanted to go with our last little bit of time together. I just also want to queue up the audience. I see some questions are starting to come in. In just a minute, we're going to open it up for broader discussion. But let's talk a little bit more about that, because I totally agree. I think, if you think about cultivating, a sustainable enterprise, you can't just be looking at your ecological footprint. There's all of the social aspects, and it really is people, planet, profit. And so I'm, and employee ownership, a lot of studies show, is the way that you actually really do build real community wealth and buy-in from your employees. So it's really great that you're doing that. I've been really inspired by efforts like that, or other companies that I've learned about who have developed employee stock ownership plans. It's really, all business owners need to be thinking this way. But tell me a little bit more about how else you're supporting the team. So employee ownership, what about wages? What's your approach to building a sustainable, people-powered organization?
Yep. So we believe that we need to provide a living wage for our employees as a baseline. And then additional things that we were able to accomplish, such as an employee ownership, need to only further support our employees, and the baseline needs to be a living wage. In food processing and in Ulster County, that is a challenge. Right now, the living wage for Kingston, New York, in a 2-2 household, so 2 adults, 2 children, is up to right around $27 an hour. That's up over 3 years from about $21 an hour. So that's, do the math, to 30%, right? Yeah, right about. Sorry, it's still early. So it's been a real task and job to ensure that we were able to keep pace with that rapid change in our area. What we have done at Bread Alone is create a pathway to $27 an hour for each and every employee at the business. And we did that by creating very specific guidelines for all the jobs in the business that establish what an employee should do to achieve that $27 an hour in each and every role in the company. Right now, our average hourly for non-tipped employees is $22.50. So we're proud of the progress, but also aware that that is short of where we need to get the average. And we have the pathway in place, and we have to continue to do the work. So that's the nuts and bolts and the challenge of that work in Ulster County right now.
But it's so admirable and also so necessary. And I to also the students from the economics block at Hawthorne Valley who are on the call, I hope you're taking this all in, because I think this is really how we need our business owners to be thinking if we're going to actually build a more just and ecologically forward world. So with that, thank you, Nels, very much. I'd love to open it up to the audience for questions. Joshua, do you want people to type their questions in the chat, or how do you want to do it?
Yeah, let's start with that. And if someone really wants to ask, they can raise their hand as well. And I know we have a couple of questions already in the chat. We want to maybe start with Jim's question there.
Sure. I don't know if you can see these, Nels, but Jim had a question around compostable and single-use packaging. What are your thoughts about extended producer responsibility?
I'm sorry, repeat what producer responsibility?
Extended producer responsibility, meaning putting the onus of the producer to deal with the entire, lifespan of the waste and the thing. So if you are a bottled water manufacturer, you're responsible for that bottle once the consumer buys it. I believe I think there is some legislation being explored right now.
So for, I should say that's not a particular area of thought that I have explored to this point. So I can't speak to that with the confidence that I would like. What I will say is that I feel carbon neutral certification is a way that businesses are able to embrace that spirit, right? It's like we're following that carbon trail out into the world and correcting it. And so for businesses, I view it as an opportunity to communicate to consumers and both win and preserve customers by finding those opportunities, even if you are way ahead of regulation and the broader market.
A follow-up to that question was, do you work with the Ulster County Reuse and Recovery Agency, or rather, would you consider working with them to create a composting system on site?
That is a great question. I have not done the research to scale what an on-site composting facility would look like for Bread Alone. My intuition is that focusing around communities and resources that can be leveraged across multiple businesses will ultimately have a bigger impact in the community. Within a business, it's hard work getting through the day. Yesterday, half my day was spent on workers' comp and our insurance renewal. And so, leveraging assets that can become expert in a specific thing, I think is important for scaling a business.
Great, thank you. Another question around the electrification of the building. So obviously you're producing a lot of your energy on site. Lori asked, where does the energy for the electricity come from? So the electricity that you're not producing on site, do you know where you're sourcing that from? I do believe that you have the option to pick who your energy provider is, right? Or through the, whatever it's called, the choice thing.
Yeah, so first to highlight again, Bread Alone, both facilities are still grid connected. It's an important point to highlight. We do not currently have a power purchase agreement for the balance of our energy that is not pulled from our solar. I don't want to make an excuse that that's an additional opportunity for us to take. The reason that we haven't is that we are still adding more solar to our own asset base. And that has been our focus over the last few years, as opposed to entering a long-term power purchase agreement from an outside source.
Great. I'm going to jump around in these questions and try to just keep on topic, and we're going to go back and forth. Someone asked about climate neutral certification. What does emission accounting for purchased goods, i.e. agricultural products, look like?
I am not able to speak to the specific mechanism in the climate neutral tool for agricultural practices. I can't see who's asking the questions, but I'd be happy to use this moment as one to really get deep with climate neutral on that specific point. And it's a good moment to highlight that the climate neutral certification, carbon neutral certifications did not exist 3 years ago. This is a new part of the sustainability movement. And I am a firm believer in the notion of progress, not perfection. And I felt that this tool was the best one out there, even if imperfect. And I want to work with the community to continue to make it stronger over time. And that, 3 years in, we have the opportunity to support an offset project 60 miles from the bakery. That did not exist 3 years ago. So I really view that as incredible progress, even though there's more work to the tool that I know will make it better.
Yeah, no, and that is, I think, a really exciting new direction. We've talked about this, as you said, and how could we be making sure that the offsets are also working to support and benefit our communities locally in the bioregion. I'm curious about how does climate neutral price a ton of carbon offsets, and what is the price?
Great question. So climate neutral will approve specific projects that members of the certification can choose to support. And each of those projects will have a different price per ton of emissions. What I can say broadly is that the cost per ton for those offsets has been increasing at a very rapid rate over the last few years. So the price range that we are seeing in the marketplace for this renewal cycle is about $15 to $30 per ton. So just to put some scale on it, bread alone last year had about 2,000 tons of emissions to offset. And so the price range for that offset this year is going to be in the $40,000 to $60,000 range for our business. And the upward price pressure on this market is coming from the large brands that are now trying to use this tool to improve their operations. It's good and bad. It's like when Delta Airlines goes into the carbon offset market, that really moves the needle and pushes up the price. We need the price to be higher because this is expensive work, but it does make it more challenging for a business like Bread Alone or others in the Hudson Valley.
Also, when you have aspirations to pay a living wage to every employee, and these are other pressures that you have on the business. Let's talk a little bit about that. There's been some questions coming in. Dennis was asking about what's on the list in terms of what you need to do to, as an employee, to get to $27 an hour. So what does that journey look like?
So the list are very prescriptive, job-specific tasks. So, for example, if an employee is working on one of our baking stations, the employee has a list of training to go through for how to score each of the different breads, when to call the proof, know when the bread is ready to go from the proof box into the oven. So it's a really nitty-gritty specific list of tasks that we want the employee to gain comfort with. And then as they progress through that list, the wage goes up. And so it's actually like a score-based system. The more tasks that an employee is proficient in, the higher their wages. And we do 2 reviews throughout the year for the entire team, which for 240 people, it's a lot of management time that's required to actually execute that work, but it's something we've all agreed is a priority in the company.
Great. Simon had a question about the employment of returning citizens and other groups that find it hard to gain employment. I'm curious if there's any programs in place at Bread Alone.
Yeah, Bread Alone has really close relationships in Ulster County to create those pathways for returning citizens and other historically disadvantaged employees. And part of the the power of those training tools that I was just describing is it provides a roadmap both for us and for the employee to build skills. And I was describing a moment ago some of like the very specific baking skills, but then there are also general skills that are part of that guideline. If an employee hasn't had the experience of coming to a workplace every day, getting to work reliably every day in the past, it's a lot to manage. And so intentionally providing some support for talking to an employee about their transportation plan, how they're going to reliably get to work so that they're there to show up with their teammates, is a part of that training and expectation to achieve that $27 an hour wage.
Great. Another question about employees from Sue. How do you generate buy-in from your employees? What are the specific ways that you've engaged them around this work?
The communication in so many forms, and as I mentioned earlier, for me personally, that's been one of the big challenges and opportunities over recent years. So some of you may have heard that about 2 months ago now, Bread Alone closed our Lake Katrine Cafe to the public and repurposed it as an employee space. That was frustrating to a lot of people in the community. But we were operating in an environment where there was no common space big enough to meet with a group of employees. Our break room wasn't even large enough for folks to comfortably take a lunch break, let alone have a forum where we could talk to our full employee group. So show actions like that, really demonstrating that we are here first to support our people, has been critical to gaining the trust and having the mechanism to communicate more about what we're striving to do as a company.
Great, thank you. Question that around very specifically around your electricity company. This is from John. Who is your electricity company and what rate have you found best for your business, given that you have solar and heat pumps?
So we work with Central Hudson. I mean, it's a one-stop shop in Ulster County. We don't have an ability to choose a rate structure. Maybe the way I'll take this answer is that I think there are some interesting opportunities in the future to inform rate structure. The one that I'm most excited about is the potential for battery backup to reduce demand charges for large commercial businesses like Bread Alone. Very quickly, Bread Alone, we pay our delivery fee for each kilowatt that we consume. And then we also pay like essentially a reserve cost so that when we are at peak demand, Central Hudson knows they have enough power on the grid to meet us, to serve our demand. If you lower what your peak demand is, you lower that reserve charge. And battery storage is one exciting way that we may be able to do that. It's early days. I think in 2-3 years, we'll have the opportunity to prove out that principle.
Great. Maybe related to that, Carol asked a question, do we need a New York State agency for
I think he has frozen. So
Did you see the
well,
question he was asking, Josh?
yeah. So do we need a New York State agency for small businesses? Generation, passing, waste, compost, emissions, financing, all the pieces supported under one umbrella. What do you think about something like that at the state level?
The existing agency that most closely informs a lot of the work I've been talking about is NYSERDA. And I would advocate for additional work within NYSERDA to help that organization work more seamlessly and better support small business. There's really good intent in New York State to support the type of work that Brett Alone is passionate about. The mechanisms to do it are still bureaucratic, and I'd love to see additional work within NYSERDA to make some of the programs that are available that support the things New York wants to achieve easier to access and to work through. And CPACE is one example of a great program that I think could be made more accessible through some work at NYSERDA.
Great, thank you. I think we have time probably just for one more question. And I'm assuming Matt maybe lost power in the storm, so I'm guessing he will not be back with us. And you may have spoken a bit about this, but Jenna had asked about climate neutral certification and what does emissions accounting for purchased goods look like, such as agricultural products. If you wouldn't mind speaking on that for just a moment.
Yeah, and broadly speaking, purchases would fall under a scope 3 emission. And again, I'm not able to speak to the specific mechanism within the certification tool that covers agricultural products. And again, it's an example in my mind of how this tool has advanced the conversation a great deal, and there's more work and refinement that we'll continue to do over the coming years.
Great. Thank you. And there's appreciation in the chat for caring and sharing this information with us. So thank you. Nels, is there anything that you would like to sort of close with? Any last words or advice for other business owners or community members that you'd like to sort of send us off with?
Well, first, again, thanks everyone for being here and for sharing in this passion and this work. My parting message is to affect change at the highest level you can. My personal work in sustainability started with a personal interest and first manifested in really light ways in the business, and over time has come to really become a steering force for a lot of our actions. And that doesn't happen immediately. It happens by incrementally building on prior efforts. And so I encourage folks to embrace that spirit of affecting change at the highest level you can in a moment, and then gaining momentum over time. Progress, not perfection.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to thank you for being here with us today. It's really valuable to hear sort of how you've gotten to where you are as a business and the support that you offer your team, your staff, your community. So thank you for everything that you do. I want to encourage folks to, some have already put their favorite type of bread from Bread Alone in the chat. I noticed early on, and I want to encourage folks, if people have a favorite one, drop it in there. We'll do an informal survey and I'll let you know what we find out after. But just wanted to thank you for being with us.
Josh, I thought you were going to ask me for my favorite bread.
Well, I would love to know
I
that as well.
can't pick a favorite child. So I'm glad you didn't put me on the spot.
Nice. Well, thank you again. And I just want to mention our next morning coffee session, which is going to be on Tuesday, April 25th. And that is preserving biodiversity while designing for pollinators. So I hope that all of you will join us. Keep an eye out for an email from me after this session. I'll include the recording and any of the resources that you mentioned as well, Nels. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great snow day and hope to see you soon.